Dead Cells is a 2D platformer whose developers describe it as a roguevania, bringing in different typical mechanics that a roguelike or Castlevania-style game brings to the table. It's also not a coincidence that its name sounds so similar to Dark Souls, as its gameplay loop is fairly reminiscent of that series. You find yourself fighting hordes of enemies, and every single one of them can be an incredible threat if you make a single mistake. Dead Cells forces you to learn and improve by its many deadly ways to end your playthrough. If you manage to make it through a zone, you'll hopefully have gathered some cells from killing enemies or from looting. These cells are your main currency that you'll be using to permanently improve your character and equipment for future playthroughs. If you die before making it to the end of the current zone, you will lose all gathered cells that you had not yet spent. The game can feel very punishing with its difficulty and permadeath mechanic, but it doesn't feel unfair. If you die, it is almost always because you made a mistake and you could have approached the situation better. If you're struggling to progress, then it's not incredibly difficult to just build up some cells on early levels and start upgrading your equipment and unlocking new gear. I highly recommend anybody that enjoys fighting games to give this a try. The combat is incredibly visceral and satisfying, and there is such a huge amount of variety in the way you can approach fights. You can focus your build on traps and hiding from your enemies. You can play defensive with good shield timing and blocking. You have access to ranged weapons, melee weapons, crazy spells and abilities. The list goes on. There are certainly pieces of equipment that feel subpar to others, but the devs are actively tweaking things to make sure that everything is useful, at least in certain situations. And if you really do have any issues with the way something is working in-game, the game has integrated mod support through the Steam Workshop. There's already a ton of different rebalancing mods, plus new content and all sorts of other fun things that people are creating. The devs have also just released an absolutely massive patch that rebalances just about every item and mechanic in the game, fixes countless bugs and quality of life issues, and adds a very exciting new custom game option. The new custom mode lets you precisely choose a dozen different things about your playthrough. You can specifically limit what kind of weapons you'll be able to find, you can increase or decrease difficulty through limiting potions, setting starting gold, or even much more crazy modifiers such as shrouding the entire map in damaging darkness. Gameplay. You will start every run with a basic weapon. As you progress through the levels, mowing down enemies and scouring for loot, you'll improve your power with new weapons and increase stats. After a few zones of platforming, dodging traps, and killing enemies, you're introduced to a boss enemy. The bosses will always come in the same order throughout a playthrough, and their mechanics stay consistent. They can certainly be overwhelming facing them the first couple times, but you'll eventually learn their timing and tendencies, or find a cheesy strategy to take them down much easier. Although you'll be fighting the same enemies and bosses many times, the game stays feeling fresh with random level generation and a large variety in equipment. And nothing feels quite as satisfying as hitting those massive crits on the final boss. User interface and controls. The UI is very sleek and responsive. It's well designed for both PC and consoles. Navigating the menus is intuitive and everything can be found quickly. I primarily play with keyboard and mouse, but the game has built-in controller support and it appears to be the preferred choice for most people. However, I had no issues enjoying the game with keyboard and mouse. If the controls are not to your liking, it is very easy to rebind them. Graphics. Dead Cells is a 2D platformer, but the graphics and art style go beyond what the majority of pixel art style games bring to the table. Although the game is pixelated and 2D, it feels more like a detailed 3D side-scroller due to the high quality of the animations. The main character is constantly breathing and appears to have depth by the way his body rotates. There are foreground and background assets that start giving a sense of scale for where you're standing. And every animation makes good use of high frame rate. You won't see any choppy movement here. Everything appears incredibly smooth and realistic. Audio. With almost 2 hours of unique music written specifically for different areas in the game, when each playthrough takes between 30 minutes to an hour, you'll find yourself never getting annoyed by repetitive songs. Most of the music is epic orchestral music with slight off tunes, leaving just a bit of that creeping feeling. The sound effects are solid. I didn't personally notice anything incredibly noteworthy, but I never found myself bothered by them either. It feels satisfying hearing the clunks and slashes of my weapon and the body parts of my enemies, so the devs certainly pulled it off correctly. Final thoughts. Dead Cells is hands down one of my favorite games I've played, and I certainly believe it's one of the best in this genre. I'm very excited and curious to see what the developer plans to do with the game going forward. If they continue to balance and add new content in this game, it will easily go down in the history books. Even as the game stands in its current state, I would say other developers should take note on what they've done here with the work of only 10 people.